On the screen was a simulation of the binary star system in which they were now marooned, motionless. At the bottom of the screen was a vector graphic of Red Dwarf. At the top of the screen was the blue ice planet, hurtling towards them on its collision course. To the left was a small sun, and to the right was its larger twin. Both were orbited by single planets. Starbug, Red Dwarf's beetle-shaped transport craft, then flashed on the screen. The craft blipped a course towards the right-hand sun and fired something into its core. The sun flared, its planet was torn from its orbit and hurled towards the center of the screen. Lister watched, bewildered and bemused, as the display dissolved into a dazzling array of plotted lines and arrows. When the screen finally cleared, all three planets now orbited the sun on the left, and Red Dwarf remained intact.
"Let me get this straight," said Lister. "Is he doing what I think he's doing?"
"Think he's doing?"
asked the cat.
"I think he's playing pool with planets."
Crichton stared pointlessly at the blank screen.
"Is that possible?"
"Well," said Rimmer, "it's certainly possible to fire a thermonuclear device into a sun and create enough of a solar flare to throw a planet out of orbit. The rest of it is somewhat in the realms of hypothesis." Lister creaked into one of the console seats and shook his head grimly.
"It's not going to work. I promise you, it's not going to work. No way, Jose, not in a month of Uranian Sundays. If Holly thinks he can use the red planet to pot the blue planet into the left-hand sun's orbit, then he's out to breakfast, lunch and tea."
"You don't think so?"
said Crichton.
"No chance. There's not enough side."
"Side?"
"Side spin. His cueing angle's all wrong."
"Lister, what are you drivelling about?" Rimmer snorted in contempt. "We're talking about a computer with an IQ of 12,368.
"That doesn't mean he can play pool."
Lister placed his palm on his chest.
"I can. Trust me, I know whereof I speak. Egbert arms on a Friday night couldn't get me off that table. This pool arm," he flexed his right arm, "is sound as a pound. And I promise you, that shot's not going to come off. He's topped it, that's what he's done. It's a felt ripper. That planet's off the table and into somebody's glass of beer."
Rimmer brayed incredulously. "We're talking about the trigonomics of four-dimensional space, you simple-minded gimboid. We're not talking about some seedy game of pool in a backstreet scouse drinking pit."
"Same principle."
"Of course it isn't." Lister nodded at the giant screen.
"I'm telling you, it's a complete miscue, and I say we chuck Holly's coordinates in the bin and let me take the shot."
"Well," Rimmer stood apart from the rest of the group, "I say we put it to the vote. On the one hand, we have a computer with an IQ in 5 figures who has a complete and total grasp of astrophysics, and on the other hand, we have Lister who, and let's be fair to him, is a complete gimp. To whose hands do we entrust our lives, the safety of this vessel, and the future of everything? Lister, what's your vote?" Lister looked up from practicing his imaginary pool shot.
"I vote for me."
Rimmer smirked, enjoying the game. 1-0 for Listypoos. I vote for Holly. 1-1. Crichters.
"Well," said Crichton, "even though I agree it's insane and suicidal, I'm afraid I have to side with the human."
"Brutal!"
grinned Lister, and slapped the mechanoid on his shoulder.
"What?"
said Rimmer. "You're voting for El Dirtball?"
"Sorry," said Crichton. "It's my programming."
Rimmer's smile receded like a fizzling fuse.
"Cat, I agree with you, buddy. Everything you said makes sense," the cat went on. "But the thing is, even though I agree with you, I can never bring myself to vote for someone with your dress sense. I'm going to vote for Lister."
3-1 to me,
said Lister, and swayed his shoulders and rotated his fists into the touch-up shuffle. Lister ran the final check-down on the Starbug's instrument panel, then flicked the intercom on so that Crichton's face appeared on the vid screen.
"We're ready to go, Crichton. Where's the cat?"
"He should be on his way, sir."
"This is madness,"
Rimmer shook his head, his eyes fixed on the Starbug's Navicomp screen.
Sheer madness.
There was a bleep, and the cat's face appeared next to Crichton's on the vid screen.
I'm not coming,
he said. Lister bunched up his face.
What?
This is the way I see it. If everything goes okay, everyone's safe, no problem. If something goes wrong, the guys on Starbug get wiped out 20 minutes ahead of the guys on Red Dwarf.
So,
there's a lot of things a guy can do in 20 minutes. I'm staying here with Crichton.
thanks a lot.
The cat grinned.
Hey, don't even mention it. Just looking after number one.
Then he bleeped off the screen. The retros scorched into the takeoff pad, and the Starbug wobbled uneasily into the air. Lister frowned at the steering column. It seemed stiff and unresponsive.
What's the matter? Nothing?
Lister lied. He wrestled the bug onto an even keel and fired the rear thrust jets. Rimmer glanced uneasily at the instrument panels.
What's happening? We're hardly moving.
Then they were. The bug's tail plummeted to the ground, grinding huge sparks from the runway, while the nose bucked towards the cargo bay roof. Lister fought through his safety webbing and thumped the reheat button. The bug bobbed and reared before finally picking up speed, if not altitude. Nose in the air, tail on the ground, it screamed and grated the 1/4 of a mile towards the airlock doors.
I hardly need remind you,
Rimmer yelled over the howling engines,
that we are carrying a small but robust thermonuclear device not 10 feet beneath us. In the name of everything that is holy, get this son of a goit in the air. You think I'm doing this for a laugh?
Lister yelled.
There's something wrong. The ship feels about 10 times heavier than it should.
The bug smacked into the rim of the airlock, flashing brilliant magnesium-white sparks that welded the doors open forever, and caromed out into the silent yawn of space. Once clear of the ship, the bug jerked and juddered, then plummeted for 2 miles down Red Dwarf's southwest face before Lister engaged the backup boosters and two-handedly wrestled the steering column into some semblance of submission.
I don't get it,
Lister shouted over the engine's maximum howl.
For some reason, we need full thrust plus emergency backup just to get the smegging thing moving.
Not for the first time, Rimmer felt extremely grateful he was already dead. Lister crouched over the flatbed scanner, one eye closed, his nose almost parallel with the screen. Silent and still, he studied the 3D simulation, then straightened and walked around the table to look at it from a new angle. There, at the far end of the screen, was the blue ice planet. This was the planet Lister had designated as the Blue Ball. To the right, circling around the bigger of the twin suns, was the planet Lister had christened the Cue Ball. The Cue Ball would strike the Blue Ball and send it into the orbit of the left-hand sun, or, as Lister preferred to call it, the pocket. That simple. It was a straightforward pot. He'd made identical shots thousands of times before. True, he'd never made the shot with planets, but, as Lister kept on insisting, in theory it should be easier because planets are bigger. Without taking his eyes from the scanner, he grabbed a 6-pack of double-strength lager out of Starbug's tiny fridge and ripped off a ring pull. He was halfway through his 3rd can before Rimmer broke his vow of silence.
How many of those are you going to drink?
I told you not to talk. Game on.
He finished the 3rd and started the 4th.
You're going to drink 4 cans of double-strength lager?
Lister brushed some imaginary dust from the scanner screen.
No, I'm going to drink all 6. I always play my best pool when I've had a few beers. Steadies the nerves. I'm not going to get blasted, just nicely drunk.
Define nicely drunk. Is nicely drunk horizontal or perpendicular?
Rimmer, I can handle it.
I'm not sure I can.
We're in the wrong position.
Lister sucked at his can.
It's an easier shot if we're over here.
He tapped the screen at a point midway between Red Dwarf and the oncoming planet.
You mean right in the path of the ice planet?
Lister nodded.
So, if you miss, we get a planet in our face.
I'm not going to miss.
Lister tugged open his 5th lager and ducked down into Starbug's cockpit section. "Mish?
What?
You said mish. I'm not going to mish, you said. You're pissed." Lister fired up the thrusters and wrenched the bug towards its new coordinates.
God, I could murder a curry. Pity we didn't bring any food. Have we got any crisps or anything?
The planet was close now. It occupied almost half of Rimmer's Navicomp screen and was growing steadily in size as it thundered towards them. Lister screwed up the empty 6th can of lager and threw it across the room at the waste bin. It hit the rim and clattered onto the floor. Rimmer closed his eyes.
Let's just get out of here. It's a shame about the Cat and Crichton, but we still have a chance to save our necks.
Lister flicked the missile launch to manual. The firing pad lurched forward from the flatbed scanner, and he nestled his nose into the bifocal viewer. Heat prickled his arms and his forehead. He lined up the crosswires on the sun around which the Q planet spun. He shifted his legs until he felt his center of balance. It was lined up. It looked right. But he waited. He waited until it felt right. Then it felt right. Space faded away, and he was back in the Egbert arms, and this was just another shot to stay on the table. He was on the 8th ball, and all it needed was a push, with just enough bottom to avoid the in-off. It was easy. He could do it. It felt right. He played his shot. He touched the launch button and increased the pressure steadily and evenly in one smooth movement. With a primal scream, the missile ripped from its housing under Starbug's belly and sizzled towards the distant sun. Lister turned to the scanner screen and watched. The whole sequence took 8 hours to play out, but to Rimmer it seemed like 8 years. To Lister it seemed like 8 seconds. The missile plunged into the sun's inferno, and a giant solar flare licked up from its raging surface, struck Lister's Q-planet, and slammed it out of orbit. The Q-planet yammered through space towards the intersection coordinates, the point where it would collide with the ice planet and knock it into the pocket of the left-hand sun. Almost immediately, Rimmer realized it was going to miss, and not by a little, by a lot. The Q-planet wasn't going to hit the ice planet. It wasn't even going to connect. The Q-planet had been wrenched from its orbit hopelessly early. It was going to streak harmlessly across the path of the oncoming ice world to be captured in orbit around the left-hand sun. Lister had sunk the Q-ball. Or rather, he was going to sink the Q-ball. First, they had to wait for the planetary pull shot to run its slow-motion course. They didn't exchange a word for 3 hours. They watched the scanner screen and hoped, against the evidence of their eyes, that it wouldn't happen. But it did. The Q-planet flew into orbit around the opposite sun. It looped round the far side in an erratic ellipse, then thumped into the sun's resident planet, and sent that curling out into space. The resident planet swept across the scanner screen, cannoned into the ice world, and hammered it into the orbit of the right-hand sun before elegantly backspinning a return path to its original position.
She rides!
Lister wiggled his hips and arms in a touch-up shuffle.
She rides!
You jammy bastard.
Played for and got.
He pumped the air with his fists, chanting rhythmically.
Yes, 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 yes!
You jammy bastard.
How can that be jammy? I pocketed all 3 planets with one stroke. How can that be a fluke?
You're trying to tell me it was deliberate?
Obviously I wasn't going to tell you I was going for the trick shot. You'd have had one of your spasms.
Oh, do smeg off. Lister started dancing around the flatbed scanner, waving a 7th can of double-strength lager.
Pool god!
He baptized himself with beer.
King of the Qs!
He thumped his chest.
Prince of the planet Potters!
Lister was doing some serious damage to his 3rd six-pack and watching the fast-motion replay on the scanner for the 171st time while Rimmer slept off the journey back to Red Dwarf in the bug's one and only sleep couch, when a planet hit them. Which planet hit them, Lister never discovered. In fact, it was the Q planet, which had been knocked out of its new orbit by the backspinning resident planet. But that didn't really concern Lister. When the craft you're in gets hit by a planet, you rarely have the presence of mind to stop and swap insurance details. Technically, the bug wasn't actually hit by the planet. It was the planet's slipstream. But that was enough to flick the craft upside down and send it on a corkscrew death dive towards the ice world.